which I give you a lot of credit for that, planning ahead. But my question is, so because it's a senior class trip, what if the kid can't afford it?
Right.
Right? So I am a little bit uneasy about planning something where parents might say, I don't want you to go. I mean, my kid will go. I mean, she's on roller coasters, but she'll go. But, you know, what if the parent's not comfortable with that? Like, so if it's a band program, right, we know the tape, the chaperones, the security, all that kind of stuff, that's because you're going to a band festival, right? Or something with a sports program. But now you're talking about a class trip where some parents might be really uncomfortable. That's why I'm not saying no, that I'm completely against it, but I have some concerns about making it a class trip, which is the rightful passage of any senior graduating right now, making an assumption that every parent is going to be comfortable with that one, and that every parent is going to say, sure, I'm going to spend $600 on my kid to go to a place in Ohio to be on a roller coaster. So I'm not trying to be a downer on this. I just want us to be really thoughtful about how you engage the entire community. And as we're talking about bullying, having some kids feel like they're getting left out of something that's really important to them for any number of reasons that they would be.
So what we're planning right now is that, so we're gonna, once we have our final earnings for our 4 years of the class officers, we're gonna split up percentages, and we're gonna try to lower that cost as much as it can be. And with the fundraisers, we can even have multiple fundraisers. And so we're also planning to have a parent meeting with 1 or 2 months before the trip, just to go in depth about everything that will be happening. We're going to have, I believe it's 1 chaperone for every 10 students, and they'll have obviously a up-to-date background check. And yeah, so we're definitely going to ensure that they're going to be
just
safe.
get in touch with the parents earlier, to get in touch with them 1 to 2 months before. You know, try to get their temperature early on to find out if there are going to be some parents pushing back on this.
So, if we were to get your approval today, we plan on having a assembly in our school, and we're going to hand out forms that gets parent permission to allow them, or their willingness to go on this trip. So we can get a basis for how many kids would go, how many kids would be able to pay, how many people would actually be interested in going all the way to Cedar Point. So that would give us a rough idea on how many kids would go, and we would be able to do a cost ship based on that. And if people weren't interested, we could start planning for a different one.
Okay, so this isn't like a extra stone. If you found out that 40% of the parents didn't want to do it, you'd come up with another game plan.
Mr. McGee and Mr. Boss advised us to try to get 60% of the class commitment, so it would be about 75 out of our 126. And we would have a assembly and advisory during school, next month, just giving the students a detailed list of what the trip is and how we're going to do it, and then we would need their commitment and a down payment by, I believe it was May 17th of this year.
So you haven't had a class vote on whether the class wants to
So
do this yet?
we wanted to wait for the school committee approval to really present it before the class. We have,
I think you're working backwards. You need to find out whether your classmates want to do this first and then come back to us.
we've gauged a large percentage of our class, and there hasn't been a student who's been opposed at all to it. So we feel like there's a very big approval by the class.
Okay, but you're asking us to approve something for the trip that might not happen if we can't get enough kids.
Right, and then if we don't get enough commitment from our class, we would have to.
I think what Chair Rosentrust is saying, and I agree with him on this, is that it would make a little more sense to, at least myself, and I don't know what the rest of the committee, but at least to me, if you, as the class president, and your officers went back to the student body that you're talking to, peers in your class, and said, this is our plan, we're looking for support for the plan, can we get 60% past this threshold, so then we'll go back to the school committee and get get our overnight trip plan approved. Because otherwise, you might come back to us in 2 months and say, well, we tried, but we 30% wanted to go, so now we need to go through this whole process again. You know what I mean? We'd rather only have you have to come to us once.
And I think not only the students, you should see how many students are interested, but I think you also need to have their parents support to make sure how many parents will allow their special students to go and will help to fund it.
Respectfully to the committee, we've talked about this at great length. Many weekly meetings that I have with these kids. And we felt that if we laid out this big plan in front of the entire class of 2020, including parents, without any backing from the school committee, that we would get people excited and anticipated for something that might not even be possible. Going into this, we had, based on history of the classes before us, we didn't even know if an overnight class trip would even be within our options to discuss. So in fairness to the students that are here tonight, it was under my recommendation and our principal's and vice principal recommendation that we come here for you tonight for the discussion and the direction, if needed, before making a presentation to the entire body of the class or the parents. So it is at the directions of their advisors and adults that they are here tonight to discuss this with you and see what questions you may have. Or if you're willing to say at this point, if we can get 60%, then you would fully support this trip for us.
Yeah, I mean, you guys made a great presentation. You know, everything makes sense. Everything seems well put together. I get that. The only thing that's missing is the idea that there's actual student support behind it. You know, that's all we're saying here. Is that, again, that's all I'm saying here. Is that I appreciate the effort that you guys are putting into it. I think that's great. I'm sorry that you think that we couldn't support that class trip to begin with. I don't know if I'm not supporting the class trip at least over the last 4 years. But that's all we're asking here.
And I'm not saying that you're not supportive. What I'm saying is this class trip is a little bit different than just going to Block Island for the day.
Sure.
Which has been what typically
Yeah.
classes have been. This class wants to reach for something a little bit different.
Yeah, but you guys have clearly shown you put a lot of thought into it. I mean, you did that much work. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's a great sounding trip, and I think that students should be happy to go if they can go. I think Ms. Vada made some really valid concerns about the cost. I think those are some things that you guys should consider. And I think especially because of that, I don't feel comfortable having put the school committee in a position where we're saying we support this trip, even though we don't know how many students can support this trip, either financially or otherwise. You know, so you're asking for our backing on this, fine, but we need the backing of the students who are going to go first, and at least in my opinion. You know, that's all I'm asking for.
Right, and I can assure you that you know I typically meet with the officers, which is about 67 students, about once every 10 days. We have been they have been talking with their friends. I've had a lot of students come up to me from the class of 2020, asking if this is something that we think can happen, and there is definitely a lot of excitement within the class about this trip.
I'm going to take your word for it. So, I'll go
Can I just ask, so, is there anything that would, I know it's so, is there anything that would stop us from supporting something like this if they could have the support that they need? In other words, we don't have to say, we're giving you your blessing, go off and do what you do. We could say, we support the concept, right? Subject to parent and student, like, there's no legal requirement for us insurance-wise, like, when they go on a van trip, it's as part of a school activity, right? If they go on as part of the class of 2020, is that considered part of a school activity? Is that something we have to worry about with insurance? In other words, is it all, it's all pooled, right? It's not a
Because
problem.
it is through the school that this trip is happening.
Right, and it's not like by us saying tonight that we approve this, that they can just go off and do whatever they want to do. They would still have to follow, right? So I think basically what you're saying is that you feel like from the administrative perspective that if the school committee says pursue, you can go ahead and try to pursue this, that's going to give them better traction to be able to try and move it forward. Does that sound right?
Something we've never done before.
Right.
So when they asked about the concept, I said the concept sounds fine, but I would ask the school committee if you would support that concept. And then it means 2 years away. Right? So if you support the concept, then you go back and do a survey or something, find out who's interested, work out all the financial issues and things like that. And then they can come back to you with a final plan and get comfortable with that.
I just have to put in my 2 cents worth. I guess I'm the grandmother. I'm definitely a downer, and I feel terrible about that because I appreciate your coming forward to us. I appreciate your presentation, and I know that a lot of thought and effort has gone into this, and you've done a wonderful job. I also know that you're a fabulous class, and just the fact that you are here tonight presenting yourself as well as you are proves to me that you are a wonderful class, and I read about you all the time in the newspapers as well. That said, and I'm speaking just for myself, I'm one of 7 here, 6, because Bill has confused himself. I have 3 real concerns about this. One is a liability issue for the school system and for the town. It's an amusement park, it's a beach, it's 2 nights at a hotel, something that, 2 nights at a hotel, and the thoughts of all the things that could happen just hurt my brain, basically. And the responsibilities of the chaperones are staggering. I think that if we, as a school committee, approve this idea, the responsibility falls on our shoulders if anything should happen. The second thing is that we're opening up Pandora's box. We would be setting a precedent that would dictate future decisions, and there may be another class coming forward that wants to do the same thing. It's not as fabulous a class as yours, and because we have said, if we say yes to you, we can't really say no to anyone else. And the third thing is, there is no educational value to this trip. It's just for fun. It's a senior class send-off, which I can understand your desire for it, and I can also understand your desire to do something different. But the very first line of our field trip policy says that the policy of the North Smithfield School Committee to encourage field trips that positively contribute to the academic curriculum. And the trip should have well-defined objectives and protocols for evaluating the trip. And it says that on the application form, it says, how will this field trip accomplish curriculum enhancement? And check a minimum of 2 areas that the field trip will address, and list a minimum of 2 learning objectives for each thing. So as you can see, your request, it's making me a little bit nervous because it doesn't fit the guidelines of our policy. I think our intent for trips is to have them supplement our curriculum as to the others that we will be approving tonight. I just have to look at the bigger picture, and I'm hating to say this because obviously I am a downer, and maybe it's because I'm the oldest one here in the school committee, I don't know, but I have to follow my instincts and decide what I feel is in your best interest, and I feel terrible about it. You don't know how badly I feel about having to say this. I think if you as an individual group want to pursue this, it's something that you can do, but I just don't know if it's something that this particular trip is something that the school committee should do. And I'm sorry, that's just my thinking on this.
So may I, Mrs. Skinner, last year, did you come before us requesting any type of trips?
No.
Has there ever been?
Obviously, the classes have trips in the past, but they're day trips. They start early in the morning, they go late at night, and they go off to somewhere. So I'm not saying that senior trips are not a good idea, but this would just so out of the box. And I can understand, as I said, why they want to do it. But
And I'm just wondering if in the past, there have been overnight trips with seniors as a class.
So, did someone answer that? I'm not sure.
I did, there has been no senior overnight.
So, I don't know, are you asking, I just want to clarify, are you asking if there has been a senior trip that has been an overnight, or has there been any overnight trips in general out of the high school?
Well, I understand it's overnight trips, like with the people, I believe would be an overnight trip, right? Those, DECA,
Right, including the 220 students that went to Disney World last year. For how many days?
Those kids perform and they take workshops while they're there.
I understand.
So we're not trying to get into a debate with you, we're just trying to figure it out. There's a way we can do it, or we're open up into a response.
So, and I just want to clarify, so I know there's some reservation on some of the committee's part about the overnights. And I would just ask you that you consider how many overnight trips are approved throughout the course of a single school year. And have the confidence in the students that we're producing that they can act appropriately. And number two, I would ask you to consider, has every senior trip, even if it's been a day trip, has every senior trip in the past have had an educational or academic requirement in it? So I would just ask you to consider that in full.
So then I would counter, have we ever had an overnight that did not have some sort of enrichment or academic?
And I can tell you, Mr. Skinner, so long as I've been on this committee, every single field trip that I have undertaken has had some type of educational component. I know that because we do the same form with every single field trip. And typically, it's We the People, it's one of the other professional organizations, student organizations that are here that are focused specifically on that. So, look, I see what you're saying, and I still say that you guys have a great plan, and I understand, the security, the team, all that stuff. Great. I also cannot discount the reservations that my fellow committee members have. I didn't realize that there had never been a trip like this overnight. It sounds like it's a lot that's being bitten off to chew. I don't know. That's unfair.
May I ask, so why do you need this officially approved by the school committee? Why can't you do it outside of us? Just a trip.
Senior, interest in senior class members, as opposed to the class of 2020 senior trip.
Well, it's something that we can consider, but we, as a senior trip, something that we hadn't considered that up to this point. So I'll just keep it simple and no. And I'd like to give a little bit of time to George Millian, who'd like to say something.
I just want to start by saying I am not an officer of the class of 2020. I'm the president of the class of 2019, but I thought I could give some insight to the committee on what goes into the process of planning a trip, considering my class is currently doing so. So I want to first off by saying I love this community, but my biggest criticism is the small town mentality that lingers in our school and within our town. We have, and I'm not saying this as a bad way, but we have a tendency to go with the flow. We're often resistant to change, in my opinion, and I commend the class of 2020 for doing something like this. We had talked about it, and the single reason that we didn't do an overnight trip for our senior trip was just because, there was a chorus trip this year, and there was kids were still recovering from the costs of the Disney trip the year before, and we didn't think it would just be too much of a financial burden, or we would have done so ourselves. But I feel like so far, they're in an opportune position to do an overnight senior trip, and I'm really glad that they are breaking tradition and doing something a little bit different. In previous years, as far as I know of myself, the senior trip has always been to Block Island, and as we all know, that's a 50-minute drive and a 30-minute ferry ride away. It's not something wildly exciting. So for our class, we decided to go a little bit farther to Martha's Vineyard, but they have a different approach to senior trip, and I don't think that's necessarily something that should be criticized any further than other senior trips in the past. Frankly, I don't see why a senior trip would need an educational value. I do think that, just as a class officer, a senior trip and a field trip are disparate in the sense that, as far as I can tell, no class that has ever gone to Martha's Vineyard or Block Island has participated in any event that would be, in any definition, considered as educational. They're not visiting wildlife refuges. They're going to the beach. But these guys worked hard for 4 years. They have a great class. And I just believe that, if this is what they have support to do, and this is what their elected representatives have chosen to do, they should be given the chance to do so. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thanks for that, George. Going back to my initial point is, I'd feel much more comfortable if I knew